Please, can I get some blood? I'm gonna chew off my goddamn leg.
How about an appetizer?
There is a special kind of disaster that only Hollywood can produce. Not the kind where a movie bombs at the box office or a star has a meltdown on set. No, this is something far more calculated, far more cynical. A studio looks at a movie that people genuinely love. A movie that meant something, that had a beginning, a middle, and an end, and they say, you know what? This needs more episodes, and a smaller budget, and none of the original cast. Hi, my name is Aaron, and this is Old TV Cinema. Here's the thing you have to understand about Hollywood in the 1980s and 1990s. Networks were hungry, cable was expanding, there were more time slots than there were original ideas, and studios had vaults full of intellectual property just sitting there. A hit movie was basically a pre-sold pitch. The name recognition was already there. The audience theoretically already existed. All you had to do was stretch a 2-hour story into 22 episodes a season, slash the budget by about 80%, replace the movie stars with television actors nobody had heard of, and print money. Except, it almost never worked, because what made those movies special wasn't the premise. It was the execution, the performances, the fact that they told a complete story and then stopped. Television doesn't stop. Television needs conflict every week, and eventually that need just grinds everything that was good about the original into dust. Here are 12 of the most painful examples. Number 1, Ferris Bueller, NBC, 1990 to 1991. Arguably the most insulting entry on this list. Ferris Bueller's Day Off is a perfect movie. Dog, I will not be taking questions on that. John Hughes, Matthew Broderick, a Cameron who needed therapy, and a Ferrari that didn't deserve what happened to it. It is, in every measurable way, a complete and finished story. So NBC looked at that perfect finished story and said, what if it was a weekly sitcom? And what if Ferris broke the fourth wall every episode to talk directly to the camera, which was actually kind of his thing in the movie, except now it just felt desperate and hollow? They cast Charlie Schlatter as Ferris, who was fine, genuinely fine, but he was not Matthew Broderick, and the show knew it. In the very first episode, Ferris literally looks at a poster of Matthew Broderick, says he's the real Ferris Bueller, and throws it in the trash. That is either the most self-aware moment in television history or a cry for help. Probably both. The show lasted 13 episodes. It was canceled so fast that by the time anyone noticed it existed, it was already gone. A perfect movie, 13 episodes, and a trash can. That's the legacy. Number 2, Dirty Dancing, CBS, 1988. Nobody puts baby in a corner. You know the line? Everyone knows the line. The movie made over $200 million on a $6 million budget, launched Patrick Swayze into the stratosphere, and had a soundtrack that basically owned the late 1980s. So, of course, CBS said, let's make it a weekly television series. Now here's where it gets really painful. The show aired in 1988, the same year the movie was still culturally dominant. They didn't even wait. They cast Melora Hardin, who is a genuinely talented actress, as Baby, and they tried to recreate the summer camp magic week after week. But here's the fundamental problem with turning Dirty Dancing into a television show. The entire emotional power of that movie is about one summer. One specific transformative summer that changed these characters forever. You can't have 44 transformative summers. At some point, Baby just keeps arriving at Kellerman's and learning lessons about class and freedom through dance. And it stops being a coming-of-age story and starts being a dance competition with better dialogue. The show lasted 11 episodes. Patrick Swayze was not involved. Nobody was surprised. Number 3, Robocop, the series, syndication, 1994. Okay, deep breath. Robocop, the original 1987 Paul Verhoeven film, is a ruthlessly violent, darkly satirical, R-rated masterpiece about corporate America eating itself alive. It is not, by any reasonable definition, family entertainment. So naturally, in 1994, someone looked at Robocop and said, what if it was a syndicated TV show that kids could watch? What if we took out all the graphic violence, all the biting satire, all the things that made it interesting, and replaced them with Saturday morning adventure plots? What was left was a show where Robocop drove around old Detroit, solving moderately inconvenient crimes, while the budget strained to keep his suit looking even remotely convincing. The original film made its point with blood and irony. The series made its point with foam, rubber, and good intentions. And look, I understand that adapting a hard R movie for network television requires compromises. But when your compromises involve removing literally everything that made the source material work, at some point, you have to ask yourself, why are we doing this at all? The show lasted 1 season. The suit looked tired. So did everyone wearing it. Number 4. Uncle Buck, CBS, 1990. Here's a show that managed to be offensive twice, which is almost impressive. The original Uncle Buck is one of John Hughes's most beloved comedies. John Candy was irreplaceable, warm, chaotic, genuinely funny. CBS adapted it twice, actually. Once in 1990 with Kevin Meaney, and again in 2016, which we will not be discussing because honestly my heart can't take it. The 1990 version lasted 1 season and 15 episodes, which, given how quickly it was forgotten, feels like it lasted considerably longer. Meaney was not a bad comedian, but he was working with scripts that took the rough edges off the character and made Uncle Buck into a slightly bumbling but ultimately wholesome sitcom dad. And that is precisely the problem. Uncle Buck is not a wholesome sitcom dad. He is a lovable disaster, a man who makes enormous pancakes and questionable life choices and still somehow shows up when it counts. The moment you sand him down into something network safe, you've lost the entire point. John Candy made that character feel real. The show made him feel like a premise. Number 5. Clueless, ABC and UPN, 1996 to 1999. Now, here's one that, I'll be honest, is a little more complicated. Clueless, the movie, came out in 1995, and it was a genuine cultural phenomenon. Alicia Silverstone, the fashion, all the slang as if. It became the shorthand for an entire era. The television adaptation actually ran for 3 seasons, which puts it ahead of most entries on this list on the survival scale. And Rachel Blanchard as Cher was not a disaster. She was actually pretty good, but the show bounced between ABC and UPN, like a hot potato. The budget shrank visibly every season. And what had felt fresh and satirical in the film slowly became a standard teenage sitcom with better outfits. The movie worked because Amy Heckerling had a specific, precise comic vision. The show worked until it didn't, and then it just kept going anyway. 3 seasons is a long time to watch something slowly lose what made it special, like watching a great outfit get washed too many times. Eventually, the color just fades. Number 6. Fast Times at Ridgemont High, CBS, R, 1986. This one is fascinating because the original film is basically a time capsule. Fast Times at Ridgemont High in 1982 launched careers. Judge Reinhold, Phoebe Cates, a very young Nicolas Cage, a very young Forrest Whitaker, Sean Penn as Jeff Spicoli, a character so perfectly realized that it essentially defined the slacker archetype for the next 2 decades. CBS adapted it in 1986 and replaced nearly the entire cast. They kept the setting, they kept the names, they did not keep Sean Penn, which is a little like making a sequel to Jaws and leaving out the shark. The show lasted 7 episodes, which in television terms is basically the equivalent of the studio quietly walking the show behind a barn. And what's interesting is that the network genuinely seemed to believe that the Ridgemont High name was the draw, that audiences had fallen in love with the school rather than with specific irreplaceable performances. They had not. They had fallen in love with the performances. 7 episodes, canceled. Spicoli would have had something to say about this. It would not have been printable. Number 7. Highlander, the series, syndication. 1992 to 1998. Alright, I want to be fair here because Highlander the series is genuinely the most successful show on this list, by almost every measurable standard. It ran for 6 seasons. It had a passionate fan base. Adrian Paul was a legitimately charismatic lead, and yet, the original 1986 film with Christopher Lambert and Sean Connery, who was playing an Egyptian Spaniard with a Scottish accent, which is the most Sean Connery thing imaginable, was a specific, operatic, mythological story. There can be only one, and all of that. The show turned that mythology into a weekly procedural, where Duncan MacLeod traveled around having sword fights and learning lessons. It became essentially Touched by an Angel, but with decapitations. And the fan base was loyal, I'll give them that. But the show slowly diluted the weight of immortality until it felt less like a burden and more like a scheduling inconvenience. The movie asked what it truly costs to live forever. The series answered, about 42 minutes per episode, minus commercials. Number 8. Working Girl, NBC, 1990. Working Girl. The movie came out in 1988. Melanie Griffith, Harrison Ford, Ace Sigourney Weaver, a story about class and ambition and women fighting to be taken seriously in a world designed to ignore them. It was sharp, it was funny, and it was deeply of its moment. NBC adapted it in 1990 and cast Sandra Bullock in a supporting role, which is one of those historical footnotes that makes you feel strange things. The show lasted 12 episodes and was canceled, and Sandra Bullock went on to become one of the biggest movie stars on the planet, so that worked out fine for her. The show itself tried to replicate the film's warmth and scrappy energy, but without the movie's budget, its supporting cast, or Harrison Ford, which I want to point out is a significant thing to be without. It just became a standard office comedy at a time when television had plenty of those already. Nothing about it was bad enough to be interesting. And in television, that is sometimes the worst thing you can be. Number 9. Friday the 13th, the series, syndication, 1987 to 1990. Here is a fun fact. Friday the 13th. The series has absolutely nothing to do with Jason Voorhees. Not one hockey mask, not one summer camp. The producers licensed the name specifically because it was recognizable and then built an entirely different show around antique dealers recovering cursed objects, which genuinely is not a terrible premise for a show. It ran for 3 seasons, but every single week, someone who tuned in expecting Jason was immediately confused, and every single week, the producers had to live with the consequences of naming their show after a slasher franchise they had no intention of honoring. It is the television equivalent of opening a steakhouse and putting a fish on the sign. The show had its own loyal audience eventually, built around its actual premise, but it could never quite shake the identity crisis baked into its title. 3 seasons. No Jason. Many cursed antiques. Television is a strange place. Number 10. Parenthood, NBC, 1990. The 1989 Parenthood film was directed by Ron Howard and starred Steve Martin, Mary Steenburgen, Diane Weist, and an ensemble so loaded it barely seems real in retrospect. It was funny and honest and genuinely moving, and it worked because of the performances holding the whole thing together. NBC adapted it in 1990 and it lasted 1 season. Now, Parenthood would eventually get a second adaptation in 2010 that ran for 6 seasons and was legitimately great, which proves the premise was always solid. But the 1990 version was undone by the same thing that undoes most of these adaptations. It tried to recreate specific performances rather than finding new ones. When you cast replacements for Steve Martin, the audience is not watching your new character. They are watching a slightly wrong version of someone they already loved, and that gap is impossible to close. The show was not terrible. It was just constantly reminding you of something better, which is its own specific kind of uncomfortable. Number 11. Blade, the series, Spike TV, 2006. Blade the movie in 1998 revived the comic book movie genre at a moment when it was effectively dead. Wesley Snipes was magnetic. The action was stylish. It proved that comic book adaptations could be cool, which, considering what followed, you could argue changed the entire course of entertainment history. Spike TV adapted it in 2006, replaced Wesley Snipes with Sticky Fingaz, which is a real name belonging to a real person who did his best, and produced 12 episodes before the show was canceled. The fundamental problem here is that Blade, as a character, works because of Wesley Snipes specifically. That physicality, that particular combination of menace and cool that he brought to the role. You cannot replace it with a different actor, a smaller budget, age and cable television production values and expect the audience not to notice. They noticed. 12 episodes, canceled. Snipes was unavailable for comment, possibly because he had other things going on around 2006, but that is a story for a different video. Number 12, Ferris Bueller. Wait, I already did that one. That's how bad it was. It broke my list. So here is the pattern, because there is always a pattern. Every single one of these shows made the same fundamental mistake. They looked at a successful movie, and they identified the wrong reasons for its success. They thought audiences loved the title, the setting, the premise. But what audiences actually loved was unrepeatable. A specific director's vision, a performance that could not be replicated, a story that worked because it ended. Television cannot give you any of those things. Television gives you continuity, and continuity is the enemy of a story that was perfect because it was finite. Studios did this because the economics made sense on paper. A recognizable title means lower marketing costs. A built-in audience means a safer bet. Except the built-in audience always showed up for the first episode, felt that wrongness immediately, and left. Every time. 12 shows, the same lesson, never learned. And that is 12 times Hollywood looked at something people loved and decided the best thing to do was make it into homework. If you enjoyed this deep dive, give the video a like and subscribe to Old TV Cinema for more retro television history every week. I'm Aaron, and I genuinely appreciate you being here. Leave a comment below telling me which one of these hurt the most, or if there's a movie-to-TV disaster I missed, because honestly, I could have made this video 45 entries long and barely scratched the surface. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.